Close your eyes, if they're not already. Let the stillness settle around you like soft linen, and imagine a world long, long ago. A land where two great rivers wound through open plains, where reeds rustled in the warm wind, and where the very first cities pressed themselves up from earth and water. This is Mesopotamia, a word that simply means between rivers. But what lies between those rivers is the beginning of everything. Before pyramids, before Rome, before the Silk Roads wound eastward, there were Ziggurats. There were clay tablets. There were gods with lion heads and laws baked into bricks. But don't expect glory. Don't expect comfort. Mesopotamia was ancient, and it was hard. It was dusty and often wet. Crops could fail. Rivers could flood. Enemies could come at dawn. And still, life went on. This is not the Mesopotamia of epic poetry and golden statues. This is the quieter, slower, heavier world, the one lived by farmers, scribes, potters, and priests. And tonight, we will walk their winding streets. We will listen to the hush of the temple courtyard. We will feel the scratch of woven reed mats beneath tired shoulders. This is a journey through ancient daily life, through the sacred and the mundane, the cold mornings and warm beer, through myths, monarchs, mystery, and mud, a great deal of mud. So breathe in. Let the noise of now fall away, and step with me gently into a time before time, into the cradle of civilization. Let's begin with the most essential truth. You probably wouldn't have made it. Not because you wouldn't be clever enough, but because life in early Mesopotamia, particularly for the average person, was nothing short of a constant, grinding negotiation with the elements, the gods, and your neighbors. Let's imagine you wake before dawn in a house made of sun-baked mud bricks. The floor beneath you is packed earth, dusty even when swept. The air is already warm, and there is no glass in the windows, just woven reeds to let the morning in. Outside, the city is still, but you can hear the muffled thump of a potter's wheel already spinning. Someone's goat bleats, a dog barks, and the day begins. You are a laborer, perhaps a farmer with a plot just outside the walls. Or perhaps you tend the irrigation channels, essential for coaxing life from the stubborn soil. Your breakfast is simple: flatbread left from yesterday and a few mouthfuls of beer. Not the bubbly, cold beer of modern times, but a thick, fermented porridge-like drink, slightly sour, slightly smoky, often consumed with a straw to avoid the sediment. There is no coffee, no tea, only this. You leave your home on foot. Your tools are few. a sickle of carved stone, a shovel with a wooden shaft. The sun rises quickly over the horizon, and with it comes the heat. In the fields, you bend low, wheat and barley, if you're lucky. Sometimes a more grain tougher, more stubborn, more common. The soil is heavy with salt from repeated flooding and poor drainage. Your hands blister, are no gloves, no rest until the sun is overhead. If it's harvest season, you must work quickly before the winds rise, before your neighbor's livestock trample the rows, before a sudden raid from nomads or rival city-states interrupts everything. You are not free. Even if you are not enslaved, your labor is bound. And if the yield is poor, you eat less. Sometimes much less. Your midday meal might be onions, garlic, and more bread. There are lentils sometimes. Dates, if they're in season. You chew slowly, not to savor, but to make it last. Water is drawn from canals, often murky. You boil it when you can, but mostly you don't. Disease is everywhere, but you don't know what it is. The gods are angry, or so you're told. When your child coughs through the night, you offer incense and beg the household deity for mercy. After sundown, the streets narrow and darken. There is no light but the moon and the flicker of oil lamps. You return to your home. There is no privacy, no insulation. You lie beside your family, shoulder to shoulder, trying not to think about tomorrow, because tomorrow it begins again. There are moments of comfort, the cool relief of a breeze off the river, the laughter of children playing near the bakery, the smell of fresh-baked bread, nutty and slightly burned. But for the most part, your life is one of repetition, of duty, of quiet endurance. You grow old by 40. Your joints ache. Your stories are passed along through the rhythm of work and rest, season and seed. And so, under the watchful gaze of unfamiliar stars, you sleep if only for a few hours before the sounds of Mesopotamia rise once more. Let us now turn our attention from the weary fields to a figure who once stood tall above them, a man whose name was spoken across plains and rivers, a man whose origin story sounds more like myth than memory. Sargon of Akkad, the first known emperor, the man who united Mesopotamia under one rule. And yet, like the empires that would follow his story, begins humbly, very humbly. A basket on the river. You may already sense a familiar echo. Legend tells us that Sargon was born to a temple priestess, and that, as an infant, he was placed in a basket and sent adrift upon the river, rescued by a gardener, raised among reeds and water, a foundling pulled from obscurity. We cannot know how true this tale is, but the symbolism remains powerful. A child of unknown fatherhood, touched by destiny. emerging from the waters to reshape the world. What we do know is that Sargon eventually found a work under a local King Urzababa of Kish. There, he served as a cupbearer. That might sound trivial, but in Mesopotamian courts, the cupbearer held real trust and proximity, close enough to poison the king, or perhaps replace him. And so he did. Exactly how Sargon came to power is lost to time. Was it a coup, a revolt, a careful political game? We do not know, but by the time the records grow clearer, Sargon is no longer a servant. He is a conqueror. The first empire, imagine now the landscape of Mesopotamia in the 24th century BCE, a patchwork of city-states, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Kish, each with their own ruler, their own gods, their own grudges. Into this fractured world stepped Sargon, and with disciplined armies and clever administration, he brought them all to heel. The Akkadian Empire was born. It stretched from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Taurus Mountains in the north, from the Zagros to the Mediterranean. Never before had such a vast multi-ethnic empire risen. And Sargon ruled it not just through force, but through innovation. He installed loyal governors, his own daughters, even as high priestesses. He standardized weights and measures. He built roads, established trade, and promoted a common language, Akkadian. In clay tablets baked by time, he boasts of washing his weapons in the sea, of defeating 30 kings, of founding a capital Aku's exact location even now remains lost to us. But with all great rises come inevitable declines. The cracks beneath the throne, even in his own lifetime, rebellion simmered. Outposts resisted tribute. Cities chafed under Akkadian governors. Sargon, aging, marched again and again to subdue unrest. One inscription reads, "He was surrounded by enemies from every side, but he struck them down, and their bones filled the plain." And though the tone is confident, there is fatigue beneath the words. Upon his death, his sons inherited the crown. One Rimush was assassinated. It was Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, who briefly restored glory, declaring himself divine, building monuments, expanding the empire. But even gods fall. A great drought swept the land. Trade routes collapsed. The once loyal provinces rose in rebellion. And from the eastern mountains came the Gushans, a mysterious people descending like storm clouds. They sacked cities. They broke the back of empire by the end of the Akkadian period. The cities that once boasted of Sargon's glory were abandoned, their temples quiet, their walls in ruin. The age of empire faded, and the silence returned. The memory of Sargon, and yet the name lived on. For centuries, later, kings would invoke Sargon as a symbol of legitimacy, as a model of rule. Even Babylon's Hammurabi styled himself a successor. Sargon became myth, bigger than memory, taller than truth. A man from the reeds who built a world that did not last. But his dream of unity, of reach, of one law across many lands would echo forward. Through Cyrus, through Alexander, through every empire that dared to rise. Tonight, as you rest, know that even emperors must sleep, and even their mighty names eventually fall quiet. From emperors to architecture, we now turn to the enduring shapes that still rise, weathered and worn above the Mesopotamian plain, massive, stepped, layered in silence and baked clay. Ziggurats, neither quite temple, nor palace, nor pyramid. They are monuments to belief and mystery. Let us begin. What was a ziggurat? Imagine you are walking through the dusty streets of an ancient city, perhaps Ur, or Eridu, or Nippur. The air is still. The sky is still. The sky is pale with heat, and above the clutter of homes and walls, a great terraced structure rises, each level built atop the last, receding like a staircase to the heavens. The ziggurat. It was the central axis of a Mesopotamian city, not a place for the masses to gather. Ordinary people were not allowed to ascend its heights. Rather, it was a sacred bridge between earth and sky, between man and God, dedicated to the city's patron deity, Enlil, Inanna, Marduk, Anu, different gods in different cities, but always the same architectural longing to lift something skyward, to beckon divinity down to dwell among the clay. The construction, mud, math, and monument. Now, let us consider how these towers were made. They were not cut from stone. Mesopotamia lacks such material. Instead, they were built from mud brick, shaped by hand, sun-dried, and stacked in vast numbers. The base was wide, sometimes hundreds of feet across. The core was often solid brick. Only the outer walls were ornamented, sometimes glazed in color, or studded with cone mosaics. Engineers used bitumen thick, sticky, and black like tar to hold parts together. It sealed joints. It resisted weather. Staircases, sometimes steep ramps, spiraled up the faces. Priests and priestesses would ascend these slowly, bearing offerings, reciting rituals, climbing quite literally toward the divine. And though we know some details of their structure, the full ritual life of the ziggurat remains elusive. There were no altars open to crowds, no sermons in the modern sense. Worship was exclusive, curated, private, a performance for the gods, not the people. The most famous ziggurat, the best preserved ziggurat we know of, is in Ur. The ziggurat of Yonamu, dating to around 2100 BCE. Its base still stands rebuilt, in parts. and gives us a sense of scale and presence. Climbing it today is an austere experience. The bricks are rough. The ascent is long. The top, flat and now bare, once held the house of the moon god, Nana. But there were many others. Eridu, the oldest city in Sumer, had one. Babylon had the grand Edamananki, whose name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It may be the inspiration for the Tower of Babel in later biblical texts, though now it is little more than a ruin. Once it stretched, perhaps 300 feet immense for the time. And as empires shifted, the ziggurat endured, a constant silhouette on the horizon, a reminder of faith, of aspiration, of a people who looked up even as they lived in mud and read below. Symbolism and the sky. Some scholars believe ziggurats held astronomical meaning. The number of levels, often 7, may have mirrored the known celestial bodies: Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. They were not observatories in the strict sense, but the gods were celestial, and proximity to the sky mattered. Perhaps, as the priests ascended, the stars wheeled overhead. And perhaps rituals were timed to lunar cycles, or equinoxes, or solstices. But again, so much is lost. What prayers were whispered at the summit? What incense was burned? What visions were sought? We may never know, but the stones remember. And in the quiet, patient language of brick and shadow, they still tell us something, that even in the world's earliest cities, people longed for something more, something higher. We now leave the high terraces of the ziggurat and descend once more into the quiet corners of Mesopotamian life. Not to the fields, not to the temples, but to a shaded room where a man bends over a tablet of clay. He is not a king, nor a farmer, nor a warrior. He is a scribe. And in a world before printing, before paper, before even the alphabet, he is essential, becoming a scribe. Imagine yourself born into a merchant family, or perhaps to a temple household. Your parents, seeing your potential, roll you in the Edaba, the tablet house. Here begins your training. You wake before dawn. You recite lists animals, plants, goods, and numbers. You copy signs over and over into soft clay. Your stylus, made of cut reed, presses shapes with precision. The Sumerian writing system is cuneiform, from the Latin for wedge-shaped. You must memorize hundreds of signs, and not just vocabulary grammar, too. Word endings, verb forms, case markers, and mathematics, fractions, base 60 arithmetic, geometry for surveying fields. Discipline is strict. Corporal punishment is routine. But if you succeed, you'll rise. Scribes were few and valued. The work of the scribe. Let's spend a day in your life once you've earned the title. You arrive at the temple complex, or the royal court, or perhaps a merchant house. You are handed a stack of moist clay tablets. Your first task, recording grain shipments. A man arrives, his hands dusty from the threshing floor. He dictates 3 baskets of barley from the western field. Delivered to storehouse 2. You press your stylus into the clay neatly, precisely. Each wedge carries meaning. Each sign matters. Later, you compose letters. A noble wants to request silver from a cousin in another city. You compose his words formally, politely. Seal it with a stamp, perhaps a cylinder seal, rolled across the wet surface. The day goes on. You draft legal contracts, land, sales, marriage agreements, loans. You might even copy old hymns, myths, or proverbs. The stories of Gilgamesh. The praise poems to Inanna. You are both accountant and archivist. Each word you write becomes part of civilization's memory. Cuneiform, the script of an age. Let us pause here and consider your tools. A simple reed stylus, a palm-sized slab of clay, once dried in the sun or baked in a kiln. These tablets can last millennia. Thousands have. They have outlived palaces. They have outlived empires. We know Sumerian law, Akkadian trade, Babylonian astronomy, because of the work of scribes like you. You write, not in lines, but in columns. You begin at the top left and work down, then across. There is no punctuation, no capitalization. But your eye and hand know the rhythm. You have practiced since childhood, and your lines are elegant, efficient, enduring. The scribe's role in a society where most people could not read. You hold quiet power. You advise merchants. You serve kings. You mediate disputes because only you can interpret the terms. Even the gods' wishes recorded by priest passed through your hand. Key, you are not wealthy, but you are secure. You do not wield a sword. You do not plow fields. Instead, you sit in the shade. You shape thoughts into permanence, and long after your voice is gone, your marks remain. As we move gently from the ink-streaked stillness of the scribe's bench, let us now follow another kind of record, one not etched by stylus, but carved into legend and preserved in clay. The tale of a great flood sent by the gods, echoes, meant to sweep away humanity. Echoes not only in ancient Mesopotamia, but in sacred texts across the world. And yet, as we sift through river sediment and buried cities, we begin to wonder, was there truly a flood? Or is this something else? Something older, grander, and strangely more human. The story of the flood, you may have heard the biblical account of Noah, his ark, the animals, the waters that rose for 40 days. Long before that story was written, there was Utnapishtim. His tale appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a masterpiece from ancient Mesopotamia. In this version, the god, angered by human noise, decide to wipe the world clean with a flood. One god, Ea, warns Utnapishtim in secret. Build a boat. Take your family. Take animals. Preserve life. The waters come. The boat survives. And when the waters recede, Utnapishtim releases birds to find land. The parallels are uncanny. But Gilgamesh's tale itself comes from earlier Sumerian flood myths, which describe a similar story, each retelling older than the last, each more fragmented. The Tigris and Euphrates, rivers of plenty and peril, imagine standing on the banks of the Euphrates. It is spring. The snow is melting far to the north, in the mountains of Anatolia. The river rises, slowly at first, then alarmingly fast. Now picture your village. Its homes made of mud brick, strong enough for the dry months, but fragile in the face of surging water. No dams, no embankments, no warning. Now that we've gently drifted through legend and flood, we return again to the dry, sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. Not to peer into myth, but to walk the streets of real places. City-states, independent, walled urban centers surrounded by farmland. Each with its own ruler, its own gods, its own ambitions. Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Eridu. Imagine their mud brick walls shimmering in the heat. Their Ziggurats temples rising like stepped mountains, looming above the plains. This was not empire. Not yet. This was something more intimate, more experimental. Cities that dreamed and schemed and prayed. Life inside the walls. Let us picture Lagash around 2400 BCE. The city hums quietly. Its alleys are narrow, pressed between mud brick homes. Children run barefoot across the heart-packed earth. Goats and donkeys crowd the edges of the streets. Each house is similar, a central courtyard surrounded by a few simple rooms. Food is cooked outside. Sleep comes with the setting sun. And in the center of it all, a temple complex dominates the skyline. Their offerings are made: grain, beer, sheep. The gods are many: Ningirsu, god of war and irrigation; Bo, the healing goddess. The people live in service directly or indirectly to their temples. Temples own land, store surplus grain, and oversee trade. They are not only spiritual centers, they are economic engines. Kings and bureaucrats, each city-state has its ruler, often styled Ensi, or governor. Not yet kings in the absolute sense, but powerful nonetheless. Often, they claim divine favor, chosen by the gods, guided by dreams or omens. rulership is not inherited by strict primogeniture, at least not at first. Sometimes it is taken, sometimes bestowed. And behind every ruler stands an expanding bureaucracy: scribes, surveyors, tax collectors. Clay tablets pile up, recording offerings, harvests, work, quotas. This is a world increasingly shaped by writing, not for poetry, but for order. And so, society begins to stratify. Ritual and timekeeping religion is not confined to temples. It seeps into the rhythms of daily life. Every action, planting, harvesting, building, has a correct time, dictated by omens or celestial signs. Festivals mark the turning of the year. In Uruk, the New Year festival is grand. Statues of the gods are paraded through the streets. Priests chant hymns, recreating the mythic beginnings of the world. Elsewhere, in Lagash or Nippur, rituals focus on agricultural renewal. Sacrifices are made not of humans, but of animals and goods. The gods are praised with incense and music. Their favor is courted through ceremony and consistency. To live in a Mesopotamian city is to live by a divine calendar, where the mundane and the sacred are forever intertwined. Conflict and cooperation, of course. City-states do not always coexist peacefully. Resources are limited. Disputes over irrigation, canals, boundary stones, or trade routes can erupt into skirmishes. Sometimes full-scale wars. Cities rise and fall. Lagash once warred with Amma over a field. The fight was not grand, but it lasted generations. Victory was not merely military, but symbolic. Boundary markers were set. Texts were inscribed declaring divine sanction. And yet, the conflict would return. Such is the rhythm of Mesopotamia. Cycles of conflict and rebuilding, rivalry and ritual. A day in the city as dusk approaches. The city quiets. Shadows stretch across courtyards. The market slows. Fires are lit for cooking. In the temples, priests continue their devotions. In homes, families gather around bowls of lentils and barley. There's little furniture. People sit on mats, eating with their hands, drinking weak beer from shared cups. And above them, the stars emerge, the same constellations watched by priests and farmers alike. The rhythm of their lives, set by the flow of rivers, the turning of the heavens, and the needs of unseen gods. Let us now descend beneath the dust and stone, not into tombs of gold or sarcophagi wrapped in splendor, but into the subtle, deeply woven beliefs the Mesopotamians held about what happens after the last breath leaves the body. This is not a land of glorious afterlives. There is no paradise here, no fiery hell, only Urkala, the land of no return. Burial beneath the floorboards. In the world of Sumer and Akkad, death was not a departure, but a transition from one burdened role to another. When someone passed, their body was often buried close to home, sometimes directly beneath the floor of the family house. The dead were not gone. They remained part of the household, requiring attention, care, and offerings. Graves might be lined with mud brick, sealed with bitumen, and furnished with simple goods. A jug of beer, a necklace, perhaps a favorite comb or tool. There were no coffins in the modern sense. The body was placed in a curled position, wrapped in textiles, and lowered into the earth. And then life above resumed, but never without awareness of the presence below. Offerings for the dead. Imagine this. You are living in your around 1800 BCE. Your father has recently passed. You sweep the floor, light a small oil lamp, and place a clay bowl filled with beer beside a low shrine. Bread is broken and set beside it. These are not mere rituals. They are necessities. Because if the dead are not fed, they grow restless. The Mesopotamians believed that spirits of the deceased, called giddy, could return if they were hungry, forgotten, or improperly buried. They might appear in dreams. They might bring illness or bad luck. And so, people took care. They whispered names, offered food, and poured drink into clay tubes called kispu channels, leading directly to the grave. To forget the dead was not only impolite, it was dangerous. Ghosts, omens, and the unquiet some spirits lingered peacefully, but others did not. There were many reasons a person might return as a ghost. A violent death, an unburied body, a lack of proper mourning, a broken promise. These ghosts were not monsters, but they were unsettled. Temples had rituals for exorcism. Priests trained in dealing with spiritual disturbances would recite incantations, burn incense, and offer symbolic gifts to guide the spirit away. Omens were also read carefully. A dog howling at night, a certain bird flying past at dawn. These could mean that a spirit was near, watching. To live in ancient Mesopotamia was to live with the dead, always. Urkala, the land below, so what, awaited the soul, not heaven. Not endless torment, but a vast, dusty underworld called Urkala. It was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Once one entered, there was no return. The spirits lived there in shadows, clothed in feathers, feeding on dust and clay. No fire, no light, no judgment, merely existence without pleasure. Even kings and heroes suffered the same fate. A quiet grayness below the earth. This idea may seem bleak, but for the Mesopotamians, it underscored a deep truth. The value of life lay in the now, not the next. And so, they built, they prayed, they remembered. Quiet reflections. Let your thoughts linger for a moment on that idea. A world where the dead still dwell beneath the floor. Where the flicker of an oil lamp is a comfort both to the living and the gone. The scent of burnt incense, the rustle of feathers in a dream. The gentle pouring of beer into a clay cup. In this world, the boundary between life and death is thin, porous, but rarely feared. It is simply another part of the long, slow rhythm of being. Let us now turn our gaze upward once more, toward the streets, walls, and towers that rose not from marble or granite, but from something far more humble. Mud. Yes, mud. In ancient Mesopotamia, mud was not simply the stuff of riverbanks and fields. It was the very substance of civilization. With it, they crafted cities, temples, ziggurats that stretched toward the heavens, canals that split the earth like veins. In a land without stone, without forests thick with timber, the people of the Tigris and Euphrates took what they had and built what they needed. Mud brick, the foundation of everything. Imagine the sticky consistency of wet earth, rich with silt from the flooding rivers. Now picture hands, dozens of them, shaping this material into simple blocks, molded by hand or with wooden frames, left in the sun to bake. These were adobe bricks, air-dried, not fired. Soft enough to crumble under pressure, and yet, when stacked skillfully, capable of forming city walls, houses, and palaces. The Mesopotamians were master bricklayers. They aligned rows of bricks with precision, often alternating horizontal and vertical placements to strengthen the structure. And when rain came, as it rarely but powerfully did, bricks eroded. Houses melted, so construction never truly stopped. There was always a wall to patch, a corner to rebuild, a courtyard to smooth. It was a constant rhythm: build, maintain, repair, repeat. Streets, districts, and noise. Now imagine walking through a city like yours. The narrow alleyways are uneven, dusty in dry seasons, slippery in the wet. Houses cluster close together, each one built around a small central courtyard, an oasis of air and light in a world of brick and shadow. There is no formal grid, no grand urban plan. An accumulation of families, trade, and generations. Paths wind unpredictably. Paths wind unpredictably. Walls lean inward. Street corners are dark, sheltered by balconies built above. The scent of baked bread mingles with that of clay, with cooking oil, with animal waste. You pass a potter's kiln, then a weaver's shop, then the house of a scribe, marked by a painted tablet above the door. The sounds are soft but constant. A donkey brays in the distance. A woman calls out in Akkadian. Water sloshes in a jar. It's not beautiful in the modern sense, but it is alive. Canals and water management. Mesopotamia's genius was not only in what they built up, but what they dug down. The rivers could flood and destroy entire harvests, but left untapped, they would leave fields barren. So, they learned to control the rivers. They dug canals, narrow channels lined with reeds and clay. They shaped irrigation basins, built dikes, constructed sluices and gates. A successful farmer was not just a grower of crops, too, took on the work, but a manager of water. City officials, coordinating labor to clear silt, reinforce canal walls, and ensure fair distribution. This infrastructure made cities possible. The desert would win. Ziggurats and public works, without it, temples, a ziggurat. At the heart of every city stood a temple complex, and above it, not a place of public worship, but a divine dwelling, layered like a tiered cake. These towering structures were also built from mud brick, but the bricks here were often kill-fired, giving greater strength. Some ziggurats rose over 20 meters high, broad at the base of glades found in ruins, narrow at the summit. Staircases or ramps led upward, drawing the eye and spirit toward the gods. They were painted in vibrant colors: ochres, whites, deep blues. Fragments hint at their once radiant facades. And beyond the ziggurat, public plazas unfolded. Open markets. In the mud trading, administrative halls, granaries, spaces for gathering or settling disputes. Each city was a puzzle of form and function, crafted not by architects in towers, but by countless hands on the ground. Stillness as you picture this landscape. Mud walls beneath a blazing sun. Alleys curved with memory. Canals that whisper between districts pause for a moment. Water they built again. And time. There's something comforting in the simplicity. A world built with what the earth provided. A civilization shaped by mud. Nothing was permanent. Everything eroded. And so, they did not leave ruins for tourists. They left dust that became the earth again. Sunlit moment, but for a brief, their cities stood tall and hummed with quiet industry. As we move now from mud walls to matters of the mind, imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on a woven mat in the shaded corner of a cool, windowless room. Before you is a smooth clay tablet. To your side, a sharpened reed stylus, and in your hand, the weight of responsibility. For you are a scribe. In ancient Mesopotamia, writing was not a poetic pastime. It was a tool of order, a record of trade, harvest, law, and prayer. And the scribes, those who could read and write cuneiform, were the quiet architects of civilization. The rise of writing. From tokens to text, let's begin with how it all started. Long before the first wedge-shaped symbol, people used small clay tokens to count goods, a cone for a sheep, a disc for a measure of grain. Eventually, these tokens were enclosed in hollow clay envelopes, bulla, to keep a record of what was traded. But soon, people realized they could simply press the symbols into the clay. No need for tokens at all. This innovation marked the birth of written language. Cuneiform, as it came to be called, means wedge-shaped. The stylus pressed sharp angles into soft clay. No ink, no parchment, just pressure and form. And so the scribes began to write. Learning to become a scribe was not easy. You likely began training as a child, sent to a scribal school known as the Idaba, or tablet house. There, under the watchful eyes of older scribes, you memorized hundreds of symbols, each with multiple meanings, sounds, and uses. Your lessons were repetitive, copying proverbs, lists, hymns, contracts. Some tablets found by archaeologists are student exercises, complete with errors, corrections, and even board doodles. Learning to write was a privilege, but also a burden. Scribes served kings, priests, merchants, and tax collectors. They documented grain rations, temple inventories, letters between rulers, and legal cases. Each symbol mattered. Each tablet had weight, and the record-keeping never ended. The clay archives picture now a room in a palace or temple, its shelves lined with tablets. Stacks of clay rectangles, some the size of your hand, others as small as a matchbox. These were the archives. Each tablet dried in the sun or baked in kilns, then cataloged and stored. Thousands of these have survived. Silent libraries buried in the ruins of cities. They tell us of debts owed, wheat harvested, boundary disputes resolved. In cities like Nippur and Ebla, entire rooms served as tablet repositories. Their records were not meant for public reading, but for officials, priests, and scribes to consult in times of need. Even kings relied on these humble documents to govern their lands. Cylinder, seals, and identity now. Let us turn to a detail often overlooked: the cylinder seal, a small, carved object worn like jewelry or hung from a belt. When rolled across soft clay, it left behind a miniature scene. Gods in procession, beasts locked in battle, priests making offerings. Each seal was unique, serving as a signature. To seal a tablet was to mark it with identity, authenticity. It meant you had seen and approved what was written. These seals were practical, but also beautiful, made of lapis lazuli, carnelian, or simple stone. They were carved with great care and artistry. Some were passed down through generations, a family's name etched in tiny, ancient scenes. Writing as magic, memory, and power for the common person. Writing may have seemed like magic. Few could understand the symbols. Fewer still could produce them. In myths, the god Enki gave writing to humanity. In practice, it was the tool of priests, kings, and accountants. But writing was more than bureaucracy. It preserved hymns and poems. It recorded epics like Gilgamesh, a tale of kingship, mortality, and longing. Even love letters and personal prayers survive, scratched into clay by hands that lived 4,000 years ago. Through writing, the Mesopotamians built something more lasting than walls. They built memory, a quiet power, so as you sit quietly in your imagined corner, tablet before you, stylus in hand, you may feel something familiar, a sense of rhythm. Press, lift, press, the soft hiss of clay under touch, the hush of concentration, like the sound of rain on earth or wind through reeds. These were the scribes, the silent watchers, the first bureaucrats of the world. Their legacy lives on, not in the clang of weapons or the echo of kings' names, but in small, forgotten rooms and the stillness of baked clay that speaks across millennia. As we approach the final stretch of our journey through ancient Mesopotamia, imagine yourself standing in the flickering torchlight of a grand palace hall in Babylon. The walls are smooth and dark, the air thick with incense and the quiet echo of sandals on stone. Before you rises a tall basalt monument, its surface carved with careful precision. Hundreds of wedge-shaped characters running top to bottom, ending in a striking relief of a king standing before a seated god. This is no idle decoration. This is the code of Hammurabi. And this segment is not just about law, it is about order. A vision of justice, discipline, and kingship carved into stone, meant to outlast the king himself. Let us walk slowly and carefully into this world of rules, rituals, and royal authority. The origins of laws in Mesopotamia did not begin with Hammurabi. Older codes existed, some etched in fragments from cities like Ishnana and Yor, but they were limited, short, and localized. Hammurabi, king of Babylon in the 18th century BCE, was different. He unified cities and tribes, consolidated power under a single vision, and made his mark, literally and politically, by setting his laws in stone. The monument we now know as the Stele of Hammurabi was not tucked away in an archive. It was displayed publicly, to be seen, to be read aloud by officials, to be remembered. But not everyone could read cuneiform, so its presence was more symbolic than practical. A visible reminder that the king's justice touched every part of life, Hammurabi's justification, divine mandate at the very top of the stele. We see Hammurabi standing reverently before Shamash, the god of justice. Shamash sits calmly, rays radiating from his shoulders, holding a measuring rod and a ring, symbols of balance and judgment. The message is clear. These laws are not just Hammurabi's words. They are divinely inspired. By linking himself to the gods, Hammurabi asserted legitimacy, not just power, but moral authority. He was not merely enforcing order. He was enacting cosmic balance. This wasn't unique to Hammurabi. Kings across Mesopotamia portrayed themselves as shepherds, chosen by the gods. But Hammurabi sealed that image into legal permanence. What the laws actually said now. You may expect that these ancient laws would resemble modern codes, rational, systematic, comprehensive, but they are not. Instead, they are written as case laws. If this happens, then this shall be done. If a man blinds another, his own eye shall be blinded. If a builder erects a house that collapses and kills the occupant, the builder shall be put to death. These are not broad moral principles. They are responses to very specific social issues: trade, disputes, marriage, disagreements, inheritance, conflicts. Crop damage. Some seem harsh, even brutal by modern standards. But many are surprisingly nuanced. Compensation is sometimes allowed. Differing rules apply depending on class. What happened to a noble was not judged the same as what happened to a slave. And always, the king is the final arbiter. The laws define boundaries not only for justice, but for hierarchy and social stability. Law as performance. We must remember that Mesopotamian law was not enforced in quiet courtrooms or by roaming constables. Witnesses were essential. Oaths were binding. Physical tokens, clay tablets, seals, and names all served to formalize agreements. Punishments could be public. Resolutions were often communal. The law was meant to be seen, not just in writing, but in practice. The stele itself may have stood in a public square or at a temple gate, a monument not just of legal instruction, but of royal presence. Even in far-off cities within the empire, copies or fragments of the code spread, accompanied by messengers, scribes, and local governors. Law and memory. It is tempting to view Hammurabi's code as the foundation of legal thinking, a precursor to modern law. But it was also something different. It was a form of royal propaganda. The prologue and epilogue of the text are filled with praise for Hammurabi. He is the protector of the weak, the destroyer of the wicked, the light among kings. The code asserts his wisdom, his strength. It portrays him not just as a lawgiver, but as a parent of his people, a shepherd a judge, priest. In truth, the stele was not just law. It was ideology in clay, a lasting legacy. As you stand, still and quiet, in the imagined presence of that stone stele, you may begin to notice its calm permanence, unmoving, enduring, simple in its presence, complex in its meaning. The Code of Hammurabi did not create peace. Wars continued. Injustice persisted. Empires rose and fell. But it did give shape to a dream, a world where rules were known, where justice was measured, and where power explained itself in writing. In the long twilight of Mesopotamian history, Hammurabi's name endured, carved into memory, just as his laws were carved into stone. And so, as the stars begin to drift quietly over the imagined plains of Mesopotamia, we too return from our journey across 10 winding paths of history, each one carved from clay, each one echoing with the soft footfalls of lives long forgotten. You have now walked the furrows of ancient farms, where mud-caked hands pulled barley from soil heavy with salt and sun. You have stood in the cool shadows of Ziggurats, felt the hush of temple corridors, and listened to scribes scratch meaning into clay. You have followed the sweep of kings and conquerors, and paused beside the sorrowful hush of buried tombs. You have tasted the bitterness of exile, and glimpsed the slow drip of time as law, belief, and memory calcified into tradition. Through each chapter, mudbrick and mead, shepherds, flute, and temple bell, you've seen that Mesopotamia was not a single place, but many. 1,000 small moments held together by river and ritual, each one whispering softly now from beneath the dust. History is often loud when told in daylight, but here, in the hush of this evening reflection, it becomes something else. Cradle. A lullaby made of dry winds, reed huts, and flickering oil lamps. A reminder that even in the most ancient cities, many someones lay down each night beside a hearth, beneath the stars, perhaps listening as you are now, to the soft rhythm of a world slowly turning. And you who have journeyed through this story, can now rest too. For while ancient Mesopotamia may have offered no coffee, no comfort, and little peace, you have the gift they longed for most: quiet, safety, a soft place to sleep. Close your eyes now, if they're not already closed. Let the dust settle, let the rivers still, and drift gently into dreams. Good night.